Hello, everyone. This is Dr. Richard Fleming, and today is Sunday, the 28th of March, 2021. If you're like me, you found it very interesting to listen to the recent news from CNN that tonight, Dr. Anthony Fauci and Dr. Redfield will be discussing SARS-CoV-2 or the coronavirus. The clips that have been released by CNN provide evidence that Dr. Redfield is going to come out and state that he believes, as a virologist and now private citizen, that SARS-CoV-2 came out of the Wuhan Virology Institute laboratory. Dr. Fauci has been seen also on social media disputing this approach, believing that this is a natural or what's called a zoonotic virus. I don't know why Dr. Redfield decided to come out with this position, and I'm not certain what is motivating him behind the scenes or what other concerns he has to protect. If, in fact, the total episode is Dr. Redfield as a virologist and now private citizen is a presentation of an honest discussion that this virus came out of a laboratory, hopefully, it will also include information about the gain of function paid for by U.S. tax dollars, including funds that came from the Department of Defense, the National Institutes of Health, and the National Institutes of Allergies and Infectious Diseases. Funding that came from Dr. Anthony Fauci and others at the U.S. federal government level, and funding that has occurred for the last 2 decades. The reason for presenting this video today ahead of schedule is to hopefully give you, the listener, an opportunity to think about the evidence that shows that this virus is not naturally occurring, so that when you listen to Dr. Redfield tonight, you will give him the benefit of the doubt. I want to take an opportunity and share some information with you by my screen. The slide that you're now seeing is part of a presentation that I've been giving to several individuals where we look at the actual spike protein of SARS-CoV-2. It is this spike protein that has the gain of function. And several inserts that have increased the ability of this spike protein and its attachment to SARS-CoV-2 to increase the infectivity of people and result in COVID-19 and deaths include an HIV pseudovirus shown here in the reddish color, 4 amino acids that are proline, arginine, and alanine, or PRRA, that insert, and the consequential change for the area of the spike protein that attaches to our cells, producing a change equaling a prion-like domain. Such domains increase the likelihood, as we've seen with animal models in this virus, of producing Alzheimer's disease and Lewy bodies and inflammation within the brain, much as many people have speculated over the years. It's important to note that this spike protein is what's being coded for in the vaccines. And my number one concern with the vaccines, apart from the fact that they haven't been adequately tested in animal models, is the fact that the actual genetic code that's included in the Pfizer, Moderna, and Janssen vaccines, along with the others that are coding for the spike protein, are coding for something that's not naturally occurring. There's 2 decades worth of evidence showing that the United States has funded gain of function research and increased ability to make a virus infective. Beginning in 1999 through 2002, where the Department of Health and Human Services was involved in amplifying the infectivity of these coronaviruses. By May of 2000, Dr. Ralph Barrick, who was funded through Peter Daszak at EcoHealth, who received his funding from people like Dr. Anthony Fauci and NIAID, the Department of Defense, National Institutes of Health, and a variety of other federal agencies, was successfully mutating viruses and using complementary DNA For those of you unaware of what this means, he was making artificial viruses. 2 years later, in April, he had successfully completed some work with a variety of other individuals producing a much more infective virus than was naturally occurring. This 2002 time frame, by the way, is when SARS-CoV, now what I refer to as SARS-CoV-1, hit China and caused concerns about coronavirus infections. This was paid for by US tax dollars by the National Institutes of Health grant, as you see here. At that same time, in 2002, Dr. Shang Li, who also received funding from EcoHealth and Peter Daszak at the Wuhan Virology Institute, began working on pseudovirus, HIV pseudovirus insertions that I showed you in the previous slide on the spike protein. This is relevant to know because not only does it show gain of function research, but Peter Daszak was the person who headed the World Health Organization trip earlier this year to China to look to see if SARS-CoV-2 was naturally occurring or made in a lab. It's not amazing to note that Mr. Daszak came back with the impression that this was a naturally occurring virus, something that he promoted in the Lancet a year ago, long before having any supposed information about the origin of SARS-CoV-2. By 2003, the following year, Dr. Barrick, again with an NIH grant paid for by you and myself, American taxpayers, began working on Coronaviridae, or coronavirus family, to increase the pathogenicity, the ability of this virus to cause harm. By 2007, as I've mentioned in some other videos, a National Science Foundation grant showed that if we ran the risk of having a pandemic, that the first thing that needed to be done was to immediately shut down international travel. Now, this is something that Dr. Fauci should have been aware of because he heads up the National Institutes of Allergies and Infectious Disease, and this was a National Science Foundation grant on an infectious disease problem, raising the question of why did Dr. Fauci suggest to President Trump and the country that we didn't need to shut down international travel. 6 years later, MERS, the Middle Eastern respiratory coronavirus that broke out in both Saudi Arabia and South Korea, demonstrated an increased pathogenicity or ability to kill people with the infection. At that same time, Dr. Shang Li and the Wuhan Virology group found 3 specific viruses that they began working on from bats. And they started modifying or changing, genetically changing the spike proteins. And 2 years later in 2015, Dr. Shang Li and Dr. Barrick admit to having changed this virus genetically to increase its ability to infect people. They warned the world that they could, in fact, produce something much more infectious and something that could produce a pandemic. 3 years later in 2018, 1 year before SARS-CoV-2 hit the scenes, Shang Li and a group of other researchers discussed this at conferences that have since been deleted. This gain of function research has resulted in more than $60 million being funneled to Peter Daszak at EcoHealth, who then funneled it out to Dr. Barrick at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, and Dr. Shizheng Li at the Wuhan Virology Institute. It's important to note that the Health and Human Services includes National Institutes of Health, National Institutes of Allergies and Infectious Diseases, and additional monies that provided this gain of function research and this mutation of this virus to make it more infective and deadly. It's also important to note that the Department of Defense provided more than almost 39 million, more than half of the money coming to Peter Daszak at EcoHealth. Not only did the Department of Defense provide money for gain of function research, they sent a special political advisor by the name of David Franz to work with the EcoHealth people, Peter Daszak. Now, Mr. Franz was a former commander of Fort Detrick, and For those of you who aren't familiar with Fort Detrick, it would be well worth your investigation to look at its role in biowarfare. The information provided can be augmented by multiple federal grants and contracts, as you see here, all going to EcoHealth Alliance from the Department of Defense, Health and Human Services, National Science Foundations, and multiple other federal agencies that raise serious questions about funding of EcoHealth and gain of function research and the development of SARS-CoV-2. I will be very interested tonight to see what has been recorded in advance by Dr. Redfield. The CDC is familiar with my work. Back in 2005, the CDC specifically asked me to attend a conference and present in Athens, Greece, which I did. During that conference, I presented two major topics. Remind you, this was in 2005. The first was the role of infectious diseases like SARS-CoV-2 and other viruses and bacteria, and the role that they play in inflammatory diseases like COVID-19, heart disease, and cancer. And the other presentation I made was on the developing patent that I was working on called FMTBDM, now referred to frequently as the Fleming method, that can measure changes going on at the tissue level. The CDC was very interested then, and I suspect it's been very interested since. Given all the research that's been going on and the gain of function research, it is my hope that tonight, Dr. Redfield is beginning the process of telling the truth, of providing leads for Americans to consider and for those who are capable of making a difference to move forward and to make a difference. Knowledge is power, and what little bit I saw of the interview already, Dr. Redfield is making it very clear that he's not presenting this as the head of the CDC. He undoubtedly would be in some type of potential problems if he did. But now as a private citizen, as a virologist, he's wanting to let people know that this virus escaped from a lab. And only by watching tonight will we see if he comes clean and discusses gain of function research paid for by the US government. Anyway, he presents his material. It should be very interesting for all of us to look and listen to. I'm going to present this on a couple different broadcasts, including Rumble, since the YouTube channel is still removing items that I've posted and threatening to shut down my primary channel. I will post a brief little clip there alerting individuals on where they can see this, although that clip will probably have to wait for another day until I'm taken off the naughty list for posting things about SARS-CoV-2 on YouTube. All my best. This is Dr. Fleming. Today is Sunday, the 28th of March, 2021.